Hello and welcome to the PhD Life Coach podcast. And today's episode is one that's come about through a kind of spontaneous moment of, oh, sod it, I might as well try on a train. So I was on my way to Stirling and I took with me a book, The Emotional Overdraft. Those of you on YouTube, you can see Emotional Overdraft by Andy Brown. And I found myself loving it. And I thought, you know what? I wonder if there's any chance this person who's written this amazing book would come on the podcast. And so I messaged Andy. And as those of you who are on YouTube can already see, here he is. Andy actually agreed to come on the show. So welcome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Delighted to be here and thank you for asking me. And to be on the podcast where, from the person that runs the How You Can Be Your Own Boss course is great. And I was listening to chunks of it, and you were talking about being driven by our thoughts, which drives our emotions, or feelings, which drives our behaviors and outcomes. And I thought these are my people. This is
Yes.
this is what I talk about as well. So it's great to be here, and I'm very excited about the conversation.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And yes, that was the thing. As I was reading it, it's always one of those wonderful moments where you read some bits where you're like, oh, that's what I say to people. And then you read other bits where you're like, oh, and I hadn't thought about it like that. And that's where you know you're in exactly the right place because you're kind of, you're on the same page. There's things you agree on, but equally you're kind of bringing slightly different things to the table, which is perfect. So let's start with let everybody know who you are and how you came to write this book.
So I'm a non-executive director these days because I'm old, but my career, I started out in market research. So all you PhDs going, yeah, that's not real research. But I started out in market research, which took me into advertising, and I spent 35 years working in and running advertising agencies. And for the last 10 or so, I've been a non-exec and an advisor to creative and research businesses to helping them build more valuable businesses. And that's really where the idea of the book came from. So looking at the challenges these founders and these leaders have in their businesses, that just seemed to be, whatever the question, the answer seemed to be, I'll do it. They were going to do it. They were the answer to everything. And I spend a lot of time talking to people about how you can resolve that. But the researcher in me just kept coming back to it and going, I wonder if there's something seems to be consistent here. So let's ask people. So I did a little bit of research, and what I discovered was that what I subsequently called an emotional overdraft, this idea of subsidizing your enterprise's success at your own mental or physical cost, is pretty universal. In fact, spoiler alert, it is universal. And it doesn't just exist within business, although my publisher said you need an audience, Andy, so you've got to write for the audience, write for a business audience. But I do believe emotional overdraft is an absolutely universal state. So I did the research, and I discovered that almost everyone at some point or another is subsidizing the success of their venture or whatever they're doing at their own mental or physical cost, one way or another. And some people, that feels like an overdraft to me. It's that sense of you dip in and you dip out when you need it. And some people dip in and stay there, and that's very damaging and dangerous. Other people can dip in and then come out again, and just like financial control. There are people that use their overdraft when they need to buy something expensive. They pay it straight off. They don't have incur all those terrible costs, and it's gone again. But it's a useful facility. Other people don't manage their costs very well. They've permanently maxed out their credit card. They're permanently in their overdraft, and they're paying a hell of a price for it.
Yeah.
And it felt to me that that emotional cost of running a business, or I've got a good friend of mine working on his PhD, and he's probably been doing it for 10 years. And I know that stresses him out. I know that pressure, it's the same thing. And his behavior is basically contributing to that broadly. I'm not saying he's to blame, but I am saying it's broadly a behavioral issue. And those behaviors tend to come out of habits. And that's what the research threw up, was there are a number of habits which tend to underpin these behaviors, which we can do something about. Because if it's habitual or if it's behavioral, it's not easy, but we can change that.
Yeah.
As long as we can spot it, we can change it. So that's what the research showed. The book took 2 more years to come out, but was published in January 2024. So yeah, it was quite a
Amazing.
relief and quite exciting.
And you mentioned that it was written for a business audience. I think I came across it first. I think you talked on another podcast, and it was on the back of that I bought the book and thought that it would be really, really relevant. And I love this idea that when you're thinking in one setting, a book that's focused very much for people that are running their own businesses, and there's bits in it that are not specifically applicable in academia, but there was so much of it that resonated, whether that's with PhD students who make up probably the majority of the people that listen to this, but also all the way through, and maybe even more so as you go further through an academic career. And now you're not just responsible for your own research, but you're responsible for grant income, you're responsible for teaching and personal tutorials and supervision and all that stuff as well. And there was so much that resonated with me at every level.
You talk about being your own boss, and I thought that it's the boss you or the implementer you,
Mm-hmm.
and that's the same situation. That's you're a boss of one, you're a
Yeah,
company of one, you're the CEO, so you're still leading, even though you are the only person leading, and the only person you're leading is you. But you're still leading, and the principles all hold true, which is there are ways of behaving which will make things easier, more sustainable, more effective, and more impactful, and there are ways of doing it that will make it inadvertently harder and more costly to you. And that's so the exact principles apply through. I mean, it's this strange thing when you launch your book baby into the world, it takes on its own little life. I get emails from mothers, and that is not my audience for the book. But I had one who sent me a voicemail, and she just said, I bought your book on someone else's recommendation. I'm not flogging the book here, I'm just sharing the story. But I bought your book, I read the first chapter, and it was like you were talking to me. So I phoned my friend up, and on the phone, I read her the first chapter, and I said, who's he talking about? And my friend said, he's talking about you. Now, that's not the person I wrote the book for, but she's effectively this mother with kids and a partner, maybe, and a family and a wider network of friends and societal pressure and all those things, effectively is the leader of that community, of her micro community. And it was speaking to her. So it has taken on a bit of a life of its own, which I love. I think the reason I wanted to come and talk to you is because of the idea. The concept of an emotional overdraft, I think, is a helpful label that we can use at the right time to spot what's going on and to do something differently. And if that's when you're a mum or a working mum or a PhD student, or you're running a team in a university, or you're running a business, great. If it works for you, then take it and do things with it.
absolutely, all the way up to the very top.
So just to pursue that a little bit, when you find yourself in an emotional overdraft, it's okay to dip in. We've all done that. It's, when I get people talking to me and they're saying, yeah, but I'm running a business. I've got a startup, or of course I'm working long hours. Yes, of course you are. But if it's persistent, if you don't stop and pay yourself back, if you stop doing exercise, if you don't find time for your family, if you stop seeing your friends, if you withdraw from your community, you stop volunteering or doing the things that feed you emotionally, that cost eventually catches up. And so it's important to realize maybe I'm in my emotional overdraft, maybe I've been here too long, maybe something's going on. And in that moment, recognize that you can genuinely help yourself if you're able to change some behavior. I know we've
Definitely. And
sort of
that's
dived
where
straight in, but
I think that having the name for it really helps. That really resonated with me. So you've touched on this a little bit in terms of what people might see themselves stopping doing, but how would somebody recognize that they're going into an emotional overdraft?
yeah, it's a good question, and it is different for everybody. I think what you're looking out for is physical or mental change. So putting on weight, maybe. I mean, it is so different for everybody else. So I'll try not to make it all about me. But it might be putting on weight, it might be losing weight, it might be physical change, it might be withdrawing from certain situations, your family, it might be, stopping doing sports. It might be that you find you're more easily distracted, you are less able to concentrate or work for longer periods of time. That's another good clue. You can't stick to a task. Your to-do list is being carried forward and rolled forward and rolled forward, and stuff isn't getting done. You maybe stop looking at your to-do list. You stop engaging with it because it's feeling overwhelming, and a sense of overwhelm is a very good signal. And these can be tiny, tiny things, and these can roll up into quite major things.
Mm.
So there's lots of little signals. If people call it stress, I'm feeling a bit stressed, you're already there. I'd be looking for those things that are leading up to before the point where you might admit that you're stressed or feeling overwhelmed, and that you've definitely got there then, but you'll recognize that. It's those small changes in behavior. And one of the things I do encourage people to do is to, if you think that you are subsidizing your PhD at your own personal cost, then get other people involved in that. Share that thought with somebody. It doesn't have to be a professional. I mean, share it with a friend, share it with someone else who's doing the same thing who can empathize, but talk about it and externalize it, because that then gives you a forum to start understanding. If you hold the thing, if you hold on to it and look at it and explore it and get inquisitive, then you've got way more chance of starting to understand what might be happening. I'm not saying it'll fix it, but it makes it more tangible. That's why the label's so helpful. If you can label it, it makes it a bit more tangible, then you can explore it.
And I think this notion of subsidizing is so important, because obviously, people talked about stress, they talk about burnout and all of these things. But I think this notion that this can be what's propping up success, that sometimes there are people who are outwardly doing really well, their PhDs are progressing well, their academic careers are looking good, it's only working because they're propping it up with their health and well-being, as you say, I think is such an interesting way to distinguish it from just solely a stress issue, that this is actually a structural thing that means that as it stands in its current form, your workload is not viable.
Yeah.
Because you're having to sell this really important stuff, essentially.
And it's invisible.
And
It's not easy to measure. And so in business, and I won't talk about profits and loss and all those things, but that's the analogy I use in business. But in business, it's easy to measure financial measures. What did we sell? What did it cost to do it? What staff costs do we have? Those things are easy to measure, and so we measure them. Emotional overdraft, that invisible subsidy that's coming from my cost to my health, me not going to the gym, me not looking after myself, me disengaging from my family and my support network, that is not easily measured.
yeah.
And if you can't measure it, it's far easier to ignore and kind of pretend it's not there and pretend that it's normal. It just is. Lots of business people, lots of leaders I talk to go, well, that's the job. It's meant to be difficult. It's meant to be hard. I'm meant to have a consistent level of low level stress. I'm meant to feel like that. No, you're not. I know loads of people who do this. I know people who run businesses, and I'm sure you know people who work through a PhD who don't. It isn't fueled by stress. It's not subsidized by a constant sense of discomfort and pain. It doesn't have to be that way.
I am going to be really cheeky. I've realised I've forgotten to feed the dog, and he's crying. He's literally crying. It's going to be 30 seconds.
So now we can talk about the real stuff, can't we? What do we think about Vicky's podcast? Are you enjoying it? I was just chatting to your listeners.
Oh, yes. I'll leave that bit in. They all know about Marley. He was literally nose butting me. Cool. Right. Let's get back in the zone. You mentioned that like profit and loss isn't so relevant as measures in academia, and you're right. But I do think there are kind of similar things. We equate publications or impact factors or grant income and things like that as some very measurable things of success, or even how long till submission. Many of my PhD students that I work with are obsessed with how long it's taking them. Are they going to submit within their funded period? Are they going to submit when they thought they were going to, etc.? So I do think there's kind of comparable quantitative
and that's
success.
And that there's comfort in quantification. There's comfort in numbers. There's comfort in you're making progress. You're hitting the milestones. That's great. I keep coming back to that Chinese proverb. You can't measure a pig fat, and I think it's right here in the sense that what they mean is simply measuring the pig is not the thing that's making it fatter. It's feeding the pig is what's making it fatter. Sometimes you can console yourself with the measurement and the measuring, and what you're ignoring is what are you actually having to pay to make that
Mm,
pig fat? What's it really costing you? And if it's taking, let's torture this analogy to death. If you're taking food from your own table to fatten the pig,
yeah.
something's gone wrong there. And so that's really the point I think about this is that it's really hard to quantify. I think it's possible to identify even if you can't quantify it exactly. So we can identify it, which is an important thing to do. But because we can't quantify it exactly, it's easy to disregard it. But the impact or the halo effect of emotional overdraft can become all too visible.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, especially for my PhD listeners, I want you to also think about your supervisors and the impact that their emotional overdraft, because I'm pretty confident most of them have one, has on you potentially, and then the impact that your emotional overdraft has on other people. Because when you're feeling like this, right, it changes how you're interacting with everybody else. Other thing, you've got much less patience, you're much less likely to be able to sort of reach out and be collaborative and all those sorts of things.
You're more sensitive
Learning
to
things.
criticism. You're less open to
Yes.
people helping you potentially. It depends on your nature how it manifests itself. The other thing is emotional overdraft is incredibly greedy. So even if you're sitting here thinking, well, this isn't me, I'm not dealing with this. Firstly, you're lying to yourself because everyone has, to some extent, deals with this.
Oh yeah.
But what it can do is it can go and steal other people's. It can create emotional overdraft in someone else and then take it. So this is the person that's working really long hours, that they're not going home until late. They're not engaging with their partner. One day they come home, there's a note on the table that says, I've left you. That 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 is a classic case of that person has probably been subsidizing you with their emotional overdraft for a very long period of time, and you didn't realize it. So it's pretty insidious, and it doesn't care where it goes to get sustenance and emotional overdraft. It will go and find it where it can.
Okay. I think we have thoroughly convinced everyone that
Good.
this is really important and that lots of people are probably experiencing it. So let's get to what can we do? If they're listening to us today and going, oh my goodness, they're talking about me,
Mhm.
where do they even start other than reading your book? Obviously,
Yeah, you
because if
can't
you're
do
not going to
anything.
push your book,
Yeah.
I will push your book.
Well, interestingly, when I first submitted the book to the publisher, they said, "This is great. We really like this, Andy, but where's the rest of the book?" And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And I'd got so excited about the concept of emotional overdraft and digging into emotions and this idea of which you talk about, which is your thinking driving your emotions, which drive your behaviors, which drive your outcomes. I'd not written the second half of the book, which is what the heck do you do about it? So they sent me back away. It's part of the reason it took so long, which actually just quite straightforward. So yeah, you definitely can do something about it. I think there's a couple of steps though here that are quite important. One is to try and measure it. We've talked about measurement a lot here.
Mm,
So I mean, if there are people listening who can come up with a better solution than this, then please do. But there's some brains listening, so please do think about it. My solution for measuring emotional overdraft was to think about it as a relative thing. So
mm,
if you think this might be you, set up your spreadsheet, get a piece of paper, whatever floats your boat, and track every day whether you think your emotional overdraft has gone up or stayed the same or gone down. And you need to do it on the day. It's not really journaling, but it's a simple form of that because you won't remember. You won't
mm,
remember in a few days' time how you felt. So on the day, at the end of the day, find a moment to reflect and think, do I feel like my emotional overdraft has got bigger? Has it gone up today? And why might that be? Is it about the same as it was? Or have I done something? Did I do something today that made me feel better? That makes me feel a little less stressed. Start with an index, so typically 100, I guess, if you want to be conventional. Add one if your emotional overdraft has gone up. Don't add anything if it's the same, and take off one if it's gone down. And what you might find across a month is that you've had, I don't know, let's say 15 days where it's gone up, 5 days where it stayed the same, and 10 days where it's gone down. So your net 5 days up. So your index would have gone from 100 to 105
mhm,
across the month. And what that tells you, broadly, your emotional overdraft has got worse in that month. Now, 100 to 105, I don't know. That might be good. It might be bad. It depends on where you are at the moment, where you started.
mhm.
But if that carries on and it went up by 10 the following month, then you're suddenly at 115 and 5 the next month and 20 the next month. You really have got to be thinking way before 4 months, by the way. what can I be doing differently? And that's where the notes really help. If you're making little notes every day, it doesn't need to be long. It's just a few bullet point keywords even that's going to give you the opportunity to go, well, is there a pattern in this? Is it the end of the week where I'm getting physically tired? Or is it that I'm not recharging at the weekends? I'm withdrawing and I'm just sitting on the couch and watching TV? Or what's happening? And try and see the patterns and try and see what's going on, because even just doing that will give you the chance to bring some data to this, really.
Quick interjection. If you're finding today's session useful, but you're driving or walking the dog or doing the dishes, I want you to do one thing for me after you've finished. Go to my website, phdlifecoach.com, and sign up for my newsletter. We all know that we listen to podcasts and we think, oh, this is really, really useful, I should do that. And then we don't end up doing it. My newsletter is designed specifically to help you make sure you actually use the stuff that you hear here. So every week you'll get a quick summary of the podcast, you'll get some reflective questions, and you'll get one action that you can take immediately to start implementing the things we've talked about. My newsletter community also have access to one session a month of online group coaching, which is completely free, but you have to be on the email list to get access. They're also the first to hear when there's spaces on my one-to-one coaching or when there are other programs and workshops that you can get involved with. So after you've listened, or even right now, make sure you go and sign up. I just add one thing on the measurement, which I think is in line with the stuff that you talk about, but sort of reminded me of some of the stuff we talk about too, which is if you're making a note about why it went up or down, I'd really encourage people to think about circumstance stuff, but also about their own thoughts. Because I could imagine a world in which somebody would say that their emotional overdraft has gone up because they got negative comments from their supervisor, and they'd write that down as their reason. And I'd really, really encourage people to write negative comments from my supervisor. I made this mean I'm not good enough to be here, or I worried that I'm now not going to finish the paper, or whatever. Because I think, and I know we'll talk about thoughts and things in a minute, but I think noticing where there's circumstantial stuff that might be shifting this, but also noticing where it's coming from the things you're telling yourself is really powerful to separate.
You're right. Not just look at the circumstances, but look at the thinking and what's behind that thinking, how you created it. The second thing I'd say is in the research, what I discovered was that there are approximately 10 broad areas of behavior, or drivers, as I call it, which every response I got was a combination of some of these 10. And whatever feedback I got from the research, I could drop it into these 10 areas. So there's 10 drivers. I won't talk about them all, but it's different for everybody. And I'm no psychologist, so I can't tell you why you've ended up like this, why you are a JFDI, which is a just flipping do it as my publisher insisted I call it, or why you have a challenge with trust, or why you feel the need to be loved by people. That's not really the point for me. I mean, go ahead and explore that if you wish, but that is what's manifesting in your behavior. And online at emotionaloverdraft.com, I've created a kind of a very simple online, it's sort of a quiz. We called it the Cosmo quiz the whole time I was writing this. I don't know if Cosmo magazine still does these 50 quizzes.
I don't know, but I remember them from being.
Do you know what I mean? I have a younger sister, and we used to read them.
I think we're of a certain age. Other people might not get this.
but they were 50 questions that will tell you whether you'll still be with your boyfriend at the end of the summer. It was ridiculous stuff like that. Has he bought you flowers? Yes, no. And this is 50 yes/no questions, and the output of which is a spider chart, which identifies where your behaviors are contributing to your emotional overdraft most. And your shape will be different to everybody else's. Everyone's different. But it's a really useful exercise. Mainly, it's pretty accurate, given that it's a 50-question quiz and it's invented by a marketeer, not a scientist. But it seems to be fairly accurate, and I see people nodding when they get it. And even if it's not, do some honest reflection and go, well, why do I think that's wrong? And why do I think that isn't me? And am I really as good at that bit? Or is it wrong, and why is it wrong? So it's just a vehicle for reflection. But it definitely creates some, for me and for most people I know who've completed it, it creates some thinking around what are the things that are happening typically for you that are almost triggers for you. What's the sort of thing that's going on? And if you do that, then you get what that does is that sensitizes you to the particular drivers that might be causing you the most problem. So JFDI is a good one, actually. It's quite a good one, which is the just flipping doer. I'm a doer. These are people who identify as doers. They get stuff done. I've learned to say get stuff done as well. I'm a doer. I make stuff happen. It's great. It's a bit like a SWOT analysis, this,
Yeah.
when you did these at universities, every strength is a weakness, every opportunity is a threat. And being a doer and getting stuff done and not hesitating and making stuff happen is brilliant on one hand. But the flip side of it is that it can lead you to do the things that aren't necessarily the priorities. It can lead you to do things that are giving you the hit and the buzz, but that aren't really getting the important things done. You're leaving things back on your to-do list that actually would move the dial, the things that
Yeah.
would have the most impact. But as we all know, every tick on a to-do list is created equal. You get the same amount of endorphins from, I don't know, rewrite my list, tick. I mean, I've been known to add things to my list which I've done which weren't on the list just to tick them
Yeah.
off. I'm sure lots of people have done that,
I stand by
and
that technique.
it's legit because if you reflect on your list,
Yes.
I think that's okay. I also, by the way, don't call it a to-do list at all. I call it a don't forget list. And that changes my relationship. I was a slave to my to-do list. It was to do. You've got to do this. You fail if you don't complete. Whereas a don't forget list is great for me because I'm a little bit forgetful. And actually, it's the same thing, but it's just saying this is stuff you mustn't forget to do. And then each morning I prioritize a few things off that list. So that helps me as a
Yeah.
technique. But so what I'm saying is JFDI can be very helpful to you, but it can also lead you to behaviors which, particularly when you start to get an emotional overdraft and you start to develop signs of stress or burnout, it then becomes worse. You can
Mm.
feel like you're getting stuff done, but you're getting the wrong things done. And you're smart people, and then you know it. And then you feel bad about it. You feel you haven't achieved things, and
Yeah.
that piles on into your emotional overdraft. So again, you're starting to feel worse. This thing feeds on itself. All of these behaviors in and of themselves can be a good thing. Empathy is one I talk about. People say, how on earth can empathy be a bad thing? Everything in business certainly is talking about empathy is the great, everyone needs to have empathy. And that's totally true. But the other side of this empathetic feeling is the need to be liked, the need to feel belonging, the need to feel that you are one of the gang or that you're accepted. And that's driving the wrong behavior or can be driving the wrong behavior. And it might not be behavior that's serving you. It might be behavior that's not serving your PhD. In the end, it's not serving anybody. So being aware of where your behavior is coming from, I think, is extremely helpful.
Yeah. And I
And
will link to the site that you mentioned in the show notes. So
and it's so easy
folks can
because
have
it's
a
the
go
same
at
name
that.
as the book. So
Perfect.
Emotional Overdraft, go there. Um, and then you really can do something about it because you can go, okay, let's get organized about it. And I don't mean to add things to your to-do list. I don't. Someone said to me, Andy, you've written this book and I feel like I need it, but I haven't got time to read it. I said, well, that's okay. Don't read it. If you haven't got time to read it, and that's going to make you feel worse.
Also, I found it sneakily on Spotify this week as well. So if people have Spotify Premium, you can find the audio version too. So,
Oh,
so
tuck in everybody.
it's that option
Um,
too.
so yeah, and I think there's a sense of I'm listening to this, Andy. I get it. I see what you're trying to say, but I'm so busy. I'm so stressed. I'm so stretched. How do I make this time to reflect? How do I make this time to stop? How do I even start to change this stuff? I feel like I'm on a hamster wheel, or worse, I'm sort of careering downhill on a.
Mm,
It's been snowing in Dorset today. I'm on a sledge just hammering down the hill. I'm not stopping till I get to the bottom. And I know that's how it feels. And I know that's what your brain is telling you. But there is a finite amount of time in every day. And your job as being a better boss of yourself is to make the time to be the boss you. I mean, I'm going to just steal your idea here, Vicky. Be the boss you. And what's the difference between the boss you and the implementer you? The implementer you is hammering away, getting things done, piling along, ticking the to-do list, maybe doing the wrong things, all the stuff we've been talking about. The boss you's job, and I talk in analogies as you've spotted already, is to stand on the bridge of the ship and look at what's coming.
mm,
What risks? Is there a storm coming? Are there pirates? Is there land? Is there a shoal of fish? Is there opportunity? Your job is to be up on the bridge of that ship, looking forwards, looking out, planning, having some kind of vision for what you want to happen, some direction. It is not simply to be down in the boat rowing like crazy. And if you stop for half a beat and think about that, you know it's right.
mm.
And that's the time, that's the moment that you go, okay, now I'll stop for a second. are just take a moment and recognize that working on me is just as important as working for me,
Yeah.
and work on yourself a little bit. And if you're finding that really difficult, I'd encourage you to talk to someone else about it because it's so much easier to find time to talk to someone about this. Just put the words out. That's why we have coaches. That's why we have mentors. That's why we have tutors. That's why we have people whose job it is to listen to us. Find that person or find those people. And in the book, I talk about a board, a personal board.
Mm.
And this, everyone has this. So in a board in a company is a group of experts who come together and their collective skills are what drive the business forwards. But you could have a personal board, and that might be someone who just listens to you, someone who's just what I call a cheerleader, just someone who is there who goes, "You're great. I don't care what you do. You're great." Sometimes you just need that.
Yeah.
You just need the cheerleader. You might need a mentor. You can maybe find a mentor. You may already have someone in your network of contacts who could be your mentor. A coach. So coach is different. I mean, coach and mentor, there's a slight distinction there. Someone who's going to help coach you through the specifics of what you need to get done. Someone who you can lean on in that moment. So that's three people on your board already. You might have someone who's a physical coach or a trainer. And I have a personal trainer because I know I would not go to the gym unless Luke was down there tapping his watch going, "You're late again, Andy. Let's do it." But I do go. I go twice a week and I run twice a week. And Luke, if I don't run, Luke WhatsApps me because he can see on Strava that I haven't run. So I'm all for personal accountability, but sometimes it helps to have a little
Yeah.
external accountability too. So you can build a group of people around you. And I would encourage you to let them know they're your personal board.
Mm.
And those people then are the ones that you can lean on without feeling guilt, without feeling like you're putting on them, without feeling embarrassed or awkward. Ask them if they're prepared to do that. And it doesn't mean you'll call on them even. It's just that they know they're there. And in my experience, most people, if you say, "I'd like you to be my mentor, I'd like you to be my supporter and my cheerleader," they're flattered and they're up for it. So that I think that's a really good idea well, I would think it's a good idea. It's my idea, isn't it? But it's not conceptually. It's not my idea. It's the idea of a personal board is not my concept, but I did jam it in the book. So yeah, I think that's a really good way to start.
Mm.
And the other thing is about yourself and the way we talk to ourselves. I think is very important and very helpful.
Yeah. And there was a part when you were talking about the impact of thoughts in the book. One thing that I really liked was you were talking about how positive emotions can feed your resilience and how you can sort of reduce or make yourself less susceptible to the overdraft by making sure that you create space for joy and interest and things like that. And I think that's fascinating because I think we often focus on reducing negative emotions.
Mm.
And we often think that the way to move ourselves out of emotional overdrafts and things like that is that we inevitably have to do less. We have to reduce our workload. We have to sort of take things off our plate. And maybe it's the bit of me that likes to be able to do everything, but I think it's really interesting, this idea that actually you can do the same things sometimes, but if you can do them with joy and interest and fun, then they don't deplete overdraft as much as if you're doing them in and I've got to do this and I should have done it before and I still haven't done it, so we should probably do it, but I don't want to kind of vibes. I wonder if you could speak to that a little bit because I love that part.
I mean, you kind of nailed it, but uh, we create the world we live in. Our brains are amazing at controlling how we think about everything. And you genuinely can reset your thinking about any given circumstance. So if you get up in the morning and you think, "Oh God, it's just I didn't do enough work yesterday and I've got piles to do and I've got to send this off by 5 and it's going to be a long day." I had a day today that was going to be many, many, many meetings. Monday this week was awful. On Sunday night, I was thinking, even my lunchtime had been taken with a meeting. I was thinking, it's ridiculous. Why does no one care about my physical well-being? And no one's who's scheduling this stuff, and it was me, of course. So
Always.
What an idiot. But I had a little word with myself because I said, well, firstly, you're busy because you're in demand and your clients want to talk to you. And those people really value what you have to say. You're having an impact on their businesses and you're having an impact on them. And I get amazing texts. At the end of Monday, I got a beautiful WhatsApp from one of my clients who said, after our conversation, I felt completely different. And she was in not a great place. Said, I felt completely different. I cannot wait to get into work tomorrow. So this is why you do it. And I reminded myself on Sunday night before I went to bed that there'll be a lot of meetings. That's a fact. But I can go into those meetings thinking, and this is 9 opportunities to make a real impact on people. Or I can spend the rest of the evening feeling like a grumpy old codger going, who is it that does all these things? It's ridiculous. I've got a horrible day coming up tomorrow. I went into that day, I had an impact. As it turns out, I got feedback that I had some impact on some people, which is the buzz I get from my job. And at the end of the day, I felt fantastic. That idea you can translate again and again and again. You genuinely can, and it's a question of practice, really. I use the I wonder exercise, which you may have spoken about before, Vicky, but
No, I haven't. No.
so it's really useful, and you can use it on yourself, but traditionally you use it in front of somebody else. So if there's someone with a challenge that they're dealing with,
Mm.
you can get 2 people sit in front of them and they do an I wonder exercise. So they talk out loud. The person they're talking about isn't allowed to say anything; they just have to listen. And the 2 people exchange. They start the sentence, every sentence with "I wonder." So it's not judgmental. It's not factual. It's just, I wonder if the reason that Andy got so cross was because he hadn't realized that there might be another reason why that person did what they did. And you can have that conversation backwards and forwards, and you can have it with yourself. So if you can catch it and stop and go, well, I wonder why that busy day is making me feel so cross. I wonder why my 5 p.m. deadline is stressing me out. Well, you could go, well, I know why it's stressing me out. I've got too much to do and I can't do it by 5 p.m. But it's not the 5 p.m. deadline. It's your thinking that's stressing you out. So what's going on in your thinking? Well, I'm not going to be able to complete everything by 5 o'clock. Is that true or isn't it? Because sometimes that's not true. But if it is true, then if you can take that moment and go, well, okay, what would be the best thing to do at this point? Would it be best for me to let someone know that? Because they'd much rather know before 5 o'clock I'm going to let them down and it's 9 o'clock now. I could phone them now and at least they know I'm not going to be able to deliver. Then they may be able to, if they're depending on me for it, or if it's a deadline, they might be prepared to extend that deadline, or they might be prepared to help or do something differently. So just by stopping, you can go wondering what your thinking is doing for you. If you're feeling something, just look at it briefly and go, is that serving me? Is that telling me that maybe my thinking is not of the quality it might be? So you're stressing and panicking about 5 o'clock. I'm in panic mode. What can I do about it? How can I think differently? It's such a good exercise. So I wonder why I'm thinking that way. I
Yeah.
wonder why that's where I'm getting to. It's not easy. It takes practice. But again, talk to other people about it and see if you practice with other people.
The other one where you were talking about things you can do about it that really struck me as relevant for this audience was the one around self-worth, that a lot of the problems here come from people attaching their self-worth to their productivity or their work. And that's something I see with my clients a lot. What can people who are running up this emotional overdraft because of their convinced that they have to be good at what they do, they have to do lots of it, they have to be the best in order to be worthwhile, what can they do about it, do you think?
So I think if your self-worth is tied up in your work, you are setting yourself up. You're putting yourself in quite a risky position. Because if your self-worth is purely about the quality of the output of the work that you're doing, of the writing that you're producing, or the thinking that you're producing, or the time in which you're producing it, other people's opinion of the work that you produce, you're giving your power to other people and other things all the time. So you're giving that away. And I think that's, if you're striving for that, there's almost no upside to it. You could be proud of the work you produce. That's the only upside. But the downside potentially is that you really are putting yourself at risk of judging yourself purely in one dimension or in one direction. And so the answer to it is really to understand where your self-worth comes from, and to look for other ways of justifying yourself or understanding your worth within your society, your community, and so on. So I think it's almost limitless number of options you have open to you. Working with the scouts keeps coming to my mind on this. You know,
I'm a
doing
guide leader.
well.
Maybe
Okay,
that's what
there
makes
you
you.
go, and that's what I mean. It's sort of finding something that's beyond you is particularly valuable. If you find that your self-worth is wrapped up in the production of that paper or simply achieving the grant, the funding you were talking about, and then you don't, where does that leave you?
Yeah.
Whereas what you might realize is that I might get another chance. That might open up a different opportunity. That's a shame. It's unfortunate, but I tried my best, and now I can do other things. I can focus on other stuff. So it's a really bad place to be from an emotional overdraft point of view because it doesn't really have any upside. And even if you do really well and you get the grant or the paper's published or you get the peer recognition or whatever happens, what happens next?
Oh, those goalposts move quickly. For
Yeah, yeah.
sure. For
I mean,
sure.
and we never stop. We are still being chased by the saber-toothed tigers in
Mm.
our brains, our monkey brains. So we are not geared up to stop and dwell on the good. We don't spend time reflecting on how marvelous we were and how fantastic it was. We immediately start thinking, how could I have done this better? What am I doing next? What's happening? We're thinking about, we still don't want to get killed by the thing. Back in the day when we lived in caves, if we stopped and congratulated ourselves every time we killed a
Mm.
deer or something, we'd get eaten.
Mm.
So we don't think that way. We're not wired like that. So even if you succeed and your self-worth is boosted in that moment, it will not last long.
Yeah. And some people, one of the things I often try and remind people is that even if you're somebody who thinks that your work is your main purpose, I mean, I'm same as you, I encourage people to have lives outside of academia, to have their hobbies and their fun and all that stuff
And
too.
I
But
see, I
even
see
if,
emotional overdraft as my mission.
yeah,
My mission is to talk about this to everyone I can because I think it helps people. So it is my mission. I'm driven by it, but not to the point where other things are excluded.
I agree. And the thing I try and remind people is that if you're going to attach your worth to your work, at least attach it to your life's work, not to this one paper. I think this is why we see it so often with people who are at the beginnings of their academic
Mm.
careers, is they've had this whole time through school and university where they're usually the brightest people, they're usually scoring amazing marks and everything like that. Suddenly they become PhD students, it's not quite as straightforward anymore for them. And their worth is tied up in this one chapter they're writing. And so getting critiques from their supervisors or submitting to a journal and getting rejected is suddenly an indictment on their entire kind of ability and thoughts and the stuff they're trying to put out in the world. I try and remind people, at least see your worth in terms of the body of work you're going to do over your 40 years in academia, for example, because then this one little thing isn't like a massive mark on your self-worth. It's just going to be one little part of the story of all the great things you contribute through your academic work. And I think sometimes that can help separate it out a little bit.
Definitely right. And this is, again, an opportunity for reframing, isn't it?
Mm.
Because you could look at that rejection and go, well, that's it. I'm not good enough. I failed. It reflects on me. I'm poor at this stuff. I'm not cut out for this, or they are stupid. They can't see my brilliance, or whatever. You can react that way to it, or you can go, this is an opportunity to learn. This is an opportunity to maybe the time is right for me to stop. Maybe actually I could be doing something way more practical that would be contributory in some way because I do think everyone should have a sense of where they're trying to go,
Mm.
not the end of the paper, but a North Star, something further on. Because if you don't have that, you're basically jumping, like a frog jumping from lily pad to lily pad. The success is not getting to the lily pad. The success is getting across the pond. That's that goal.
Mm.
So another tortured analogy for you. Um, so I think you're absolutely right, and it's such an opportunity to see the world in a different way. How could I have done that differently? What could I have done? How can I change this? How good am I at taking criticism? Is this an opportunity for me to hear criticism and become a total criticism ninja? Take this on and do amazing things with it. Well, that's the opportunity it presents.
Now, one thing I wanted to ask you about, I really enjoyed the final bit of your book because often people talk about, and here are all the things you can do to get over this problem. You had that big chunk, but then you had the sort of and then other things you can do after that. If you want to take this further, you want to think about it in more depth. And I really, really enjoyed that chapter. And one of the things that really stood out to me as a really clever idea was this notion of a relapse kit. And
Oh,
I
yeah.
wonder if you could tell the listeners a little bit about the relapse kit, because I thought that was really clever, and it was something that I hadn't heard about in other places.
Yeah, so it sort of came from as amalgam of other people's ideas. So there's no new ideas in the world, of course there aren't. But I struggle with my weight, and my weight's gone up and down over the years. I'm 59 now, and it's probably never going to change, but I keep hoping. And I'm pretty harsh on myself, and my self-speak is pretty horrible, and I'm very judgmental, and it's yeah, it's not great when I fall off the wagon, and particularly with me, it's snacks. And the coach I was working with said, it was chocolate biscuits at the time. He said, if you find yourself going to the cupboard and having a chocolate biscuit, he said, that's a relapse. We're trying to go through 28 days without having one, and you find 14 days in, you haven't failed really. You've had a chocolate biscuit, but you're not going to eat the whole packet. And if you do eat the whole packet, say you've just eaten a packet of biscuits. Failure would be doing that every day and going back to that sort of behavior. So that's just a relapse. And that happens in all sorts of walks of life, in all sorts of ways. All the behaviors, particularly when trying to change habit. So he said, put a little note in that cupboard with the biscuits. He said, I just want you to write a little note where you tell yourself what what you think about yourself in that, what you really think about yourself in that moment. And what I really think about with myself when I'm being rational about it is that's normal. It's human nature. You've just had a damn biscuit. It doesn't really matter. Don't have another one, Andy. Don't just carry on, because my,
Yeah.
my brain goes, you failed now, so it doesn't matter. You
Mm.
might as well. And by the way, go to the shop and get another packet. So that's what the note said. And he said, and just tuck it by the biscuits. And when you have a biscuit, if you relapse, get the note out and have a little read. And I just thought this is such a good idea, such a strong idea. So a relapse kit could be, if you find that you're struggling to get down to some deep work, and you're distracting yourself again with YouTube or social media. That's a sort of typical sort of thing that might happen, I guess. Your relapse kit could be a note to yourself, which just to remind yourself what that does to you and why you're probably doing it, and to be kind to yourself, and give yourself some helpful advice. It could be someone's phone number. So maybe in that moment, the best thing actually you could do is phone. You've agreed that you're going to phone one of your personal board, and you can phone one of them up and say, just spent 2 hours watching YouTube videos about cats on skateboards, and I'm really not getting down to my work. I'm starting to spiral a bit, and I'm now getting down on myself, which means I still can't work, and it's getting worse. So I'm going to watch some more, and you can chat about it. Then maybe that's your relapse kit. Maybe it's what's your motivation. It might be something that reminds you of your motivation, but have it available and have it not out and on your table or on your wall. I think you have to, with a relapse kit, you have to go and think of it like a first aid kit with the white cross on the top. You're going to open this box or open this thing, and it's going to help you in that moment. It's going to be like a emotional bandage. It works every time,
Mm.
particularly if when you plan it, when you structure that relapse kit, you do it with absolute kindness and generosity towards yourself. You
Yeah.
have to be thinking, I love this person. I want this person to succeed. They're just human. I know they do great stuff when they can really get down to it. So I'm going to forgive them. They need to forgive themselves and have another go. If you
Yeah.
do that, it works incredibly well. Don't have a sign there that says, you weak individual, you fell. That's not what we're talking about here. That's like putting rusty razor blades in your first aid kit. That's not helpful.
Yeah.
It's got to be something helpful. But yeah, I get lots of feedback on that, and it really does work.
Yeah. No, and I really like that you emphasize the kindness and the reassurance. And then I think not making it too big a deal that you've relapsed, because I think often when we wrap that up in a load of shame and a load of self-criticism, we end up avoiding our goal for much longer because suddenly you hate yourself because, you said you were going to write this much every day and you haven't
Mhm.
today. And then you
Look at
start
that. Day
avoiding it.
one, 1,000 words a day. Day one, I haven't written 1,000 words.
Yeah. And so you then
I've
avoid it for a
failed.
month
Yeah.
instead of being like, oh, okay, I was going to do 1,000 words a day. I haven't, still got an hour left. Maybe I could do 200. Let's crack that bit out. We'll get on tomorrow.
You know, expression, if you've only got 40% to give that day and you've given 40%, you've given 100% that day.
Yeah.
I love that idea. If that's what's available to you and you've given it all. So this sense of kindness is really important. I'm not a new age woo-woo thinker, but genuinely self-kindness is one of the rarest commodities, and it's something to cultivate in yourself. If you're listening to this, it's really important.
And you can even bring that into the goal setting. So as an example, I would never recommend somebody sets a no biscuits for 28 days goal, because you screw that up one day, you've messed your goal. If you set yourself as few biscuits as possible in 28 days, for example, or even 28 apples in 28 days or whatever it is, giving yourself something alternative to do, then it becomes something that you can work towards throughout. If you have one day where you have a biscuit, then okay, crack on. I can still have 27 days where I don't eat a biscuit, and that's pretty awesome.
Exactly that. So designing the goals are really important.
Yeah.
And talk to someone like you who understands the precise nature of what you're dealing with and can give you some practical hands-on help. That's really important here. So that's the point. You don't have to do this alone, and doing it alone is not heroic.
Yeah, I love this. You're telling people to come to me for coaching. I'm telling them to buy your book. It's like a mutual promotion.
Sorry, everybody. That wasn't set up. That wasn't set up.
It wasn't. We're just that good. Anyway, thank you so much, Andy. I really, really appreciate you coming on. We've already mentioned your website a little bit and obviously the book, but if people want to know more, where can they find you?
I'd say go to emotionaloverdraft.com. I produce a podcast myself, and there's lots of interesting case studies on there. I write about it a lot. And just knowing more about it is a helpful thing to people. And yeah, everyone knows where they can buy a book. Go independent if you can.
Yes, perfect. Thank you so much for coming on. Thank you everyone for listening, and I will see you next week. Thank you for listening to the PhD Life Coach podcast. If you like this episode, please tell your friends, your colleagues, and your universities. I'd appreciate it if you took the time to leave a review, give me stars, stickers, and all that general approval as well. If you'd like to find out more about working with me, either for yourself or for people at your university, please check out my website at thephdlifecoach.com. You can also sign up to hear more about my free group coaching sessions for PhD students and academics. See you next time.